Welcome to Ecology Matters, a podcast from the Ecological Society of Australia, featuring ecologists from all over the country.
The biodiversity in this part of the world is just incredible.
It's not just ice and snow, it's teeming with life on the coast.
I see that and I say, okay, well, that's a great opportunity to study it more.
Looking at those sites gives you a sense of joy and hope.
Love being around, it's incredible.
It's just, it's a really awesome program, and it's just so healing, like, for our whole community.
It's the beauty of ecology, is that it's so interconnected.
Yeah, it's been really exciting, actually.
We're pleased to have Associate Professor John Morgan as our guest this episode. He's a leading authority on the ecology of native grasslands in Australia, specialising in understanding how disturbances like fire and grazing determine the long-term dynamics of plant communities. We caught up with John at the 2022 ESA conference in Wollongong, where he received the Australian Ecology Research Award. Could you start by giving us an idea of how you got started in ecology? What sparked your interest originally?
As a 5, 6, 7-year-old, I just got really fascinated by it. It's almost, it's an unknowable reason, but being in nature, being around plants, being around animals, it was just, I got the hook. I then did that as a hobby. So I didn't go to university to think about being an ecologist. I'd never heard of the word ecologist. I did a horticulture degree to start with, and I got interested in plants. Well, I was always interested in plants, but I got interested in plants as ways of regenerating landscapes. And I had a lecturer there at uni who just totally switched me onto this idea that plants were parts of ecosystems and that things lived in them. So then I went and did another degree, and that's where I became a botanist and an ecologist. So I did the formal training. But I remember getting into second year basically knowing all the plants that we were ever shown because I'd been exposed to them. I kind of knew all the animals in the zoology pracs, but what I didn't know was the theory. And so I was really lucky, again, had really good mentors that talked about theory and introduced me to the concept of science. So that's how I sort of got into, in a roundabout way to ecology. Certainly not a directional path, in a linear fashion. I focus on herbaceous plants more generally, so things below your knees, often below your ankles. I was fascinated by diversity, and you can see diversity when it's at really small scales, below your knees. Often, or having morning tea is actually a great place to make lots of great observations. So I remember just getting fascinated by small plants, no bigger than, the size of a matchbox or something like that, and wondering about this diversity. And when I started looking into it, it was really obvious that most Australian ecology was focusing on bigger plants, often still does. So I was really, really interested in tiny, tiny plants, what we often call inch plants, so centimetre high plants, how they operate, the diversity. So for me, I think it was the fascination with the small, and it's probably the equivalent of people who are interested in invertebrates and stuff like that, the small detail. Why I didn't get so interested in more common ecosystems like forests and stuff is I kind of figured out that lots of people were already doing it. And so I saw an opportunity in the context of no one knows much about this sort of stuff, so maybe I can make a mark by coming to grips with this diversity, and I have been doing it ever since really I got first into it.
And have you found that the appreciation of its importance has changed over time, or people are recognising how important it is?
Yeah, one of the big things is when I started off, grasslands, and as they often still are, secondary cousins to tall forests and things like that, old growth systems. But now you can't go anywhere. I can't go anywhere and do research without people bugging me about what I'm doing, and I can't go anywhere to a conference without people bugging me about how much they like what I'm doing in the context of grasslands. All these people come out of the woodwork. And so, grasslands have a loyal and faithful following, I reckon, because we are sort of the hidden sort of biologists in some respects. We're down on our hands and knees. We're not looking up, we're looking down. And you'd be surprised at the number of people who get really excited by small things. But I think that's part of the journey of making people excited by it as well.
That's been recognised this year in your award, the Australian Ecology Research Award. How does that feel to you to have been on this journey for a number of decades and for it to be recognised now? What would you say to other people getting into this field?
Well, I'd say you don't go into, I certainly don't go into a a line of inquiry, thinking about, I want to get all this recognition. I've always been of the opinion that if your work's good and it speaks for itself, people will recognise you. So I've always been like that sort of, you do good work and then the recognition comes lately. So for a long time, I've been more than happy to push up my collaborators, been happy to push up my students, because they're the ones that really deserve the recognition. But it's super nice to be recognised by the Ecological Society of Australia for a long-term commitment to ecological study of, herbaceous ecosystems. It's really nice to be recognised by your peers, to actually, that they think that, you're a good scientist and all that kind of stuff. But really, I think what it actually is mostly recognising is that the type of work that we do and the ecosystems we work in deserve the recognition that they get through that sort of award.
And I noticed at your keynote yesterday that you had quite a strong following of your students there as your support crowd. How important do you think it is to support people, as you just said?
I think it's absolutely critical. So the role of mentoring comes in two forms. I think it's the individual mentoring that you can give students, and I'm really big on supporting students because everyone has the imposter syndrome. We know that. You only have to talk to people. So that word of advice or that just word of encouragement can make an absolute amazing amount of difference. I got that at my very first Ecological Society conference in 1993 from Jill Landsberg. She came up after my talk. I thought I'd done a terrible job. And she came and she spent just a minute or two chatting about my work, how interesting it was. She thought, I'd done a good job. And that just validates you. And so mentoring is a bit about validation. It is about guiding, but it's validation. The Ecological Society of Australia is one of the best societies in Australia because of its support for students. It is a really encouraging environment to mentor and to develop young scientists. They've been really pivotal to my journey over 30 years now, almost 30 years. I think that the society provides on a whole range of levels support, whether it be financial to get to conferences, support to do research, but also that sort of hard to quantify support of mentoring through conference programs, through those interactions that you have with students. And I must admit, at this conference, I've been catching up with students I haven't seen for a few years, and it's been great to hear about their career progressions. And it's really great when students come and seek you out and say thank you for your help along the way. So the other, I think, important part of mentoring is having a team of people that you create around you. So you have a, in a university sense, a lab group that works really well as a team. Like they actually care for one another and they mentor their peers. And so I've always been really big on having a lab group that really is connected, that really is involved in each other's work in the context of wanting to help where they can. And it's never been about the individual, it's been about the research, and it's the individuals that are doing the research that I want to support. And so I think it's absolutely critical.
We hear a lot of the challenges that young ecologists face in terms of work-life balance and trying to manage families and short-term contracts and things like that. What sort of words of encouragement would you give to younger ecologists in general trying to get in and trying to manage some of those challenges?
Look, that's a really difficult one because I know it's a very competitive area. Every area is competitive. But there's two things I think you've got to do. You've got to recognise you've got to have a balance because burnout is absolutely real. And if you think you're not good enough, that drives you to continue to work and strive harder and work and strive harder. And that actually is a really vicious cycle. What you've got to do is figure out what do you really like doing in life, and that includes in your work life. And what are the things that actually also make you happy outside of your work life. And so you've got to balance that. And the reason you've got to do that is because you are less productive long term if you just focus on work all the time. I've always found, for me, being a field biologist, I actually get to do work and my hobbies at the same time, like bushwalking, camping, going into remote areas. The idea that you can do work and takes you into these fabulous places is actually really, it regenerates everything about you. And then you get there and go, oh yeah, and I need to do some quadrats now. But I think if you can find that sort of happy mix where your hobby is also a bit your work, but you want it to be different as well, because then it becomes all consuming. But you need to recognise that it actually it benefits you long term getting away from this, because your clarity of ideas starts clouding when you're so close to things. And if you don't take the time to, I guess, smell the roses, you don't appreciate then what you're actually doing, I think.
Ecology Matters is a podcast by the Ecological Society of Australia, a not-for-profit organisation supporting ecologists and ecological science in Australia. We acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. To learn more about our work, follow us on social media, visit our website or sign up to our newsletter. You can find links to these in the show notes. The theme music is Glow by Scott Buckley. Lastly, thank you to all the ecologists who have taken part in this series and shared their perspectives on why ecology matters.